living world is connected by a vast kingdom of life. We are only just beginning to discover. Fungi are so much more than mushrooms.
Everywhere you look, there are stories unfolding around fungi. Connecting all life in the forest, but with all the fungal species on Earth. You've only described about 5%.
As you do research, you're seeing things that no one's ever seen before.
Fungi have the chemical arsenal to break down plastic.
Sounds way far out, but my long-term dream would be able to actually grow organs using mycelium.
Yet we risk losing entire branches of the tree of life to extinction.
We're burning the library, a library of different ways to rise to the challenge of living.
If fungi have taught us anything, it's that those who can adapt survive. So how might we unravel their secrets to survive the radical change of our own times?
And thank you so much for being here and making it out of bed for the 9 a.m. slot. Merlin, so shall we start at the beginning? So we've got a room full of gardeners here, and we've all been taught about how important soil is. So don't compact it. What pH is it? Is it acid? Is it whatever? But I don't know if I was really aware of all the other things that we're going to talk about, fungi, organisms. So how did it all start for you? And what ultimately led you to write the book?
Good question, and thanks all for coming and for getting out of bed. It's just want to second that gratitude. It actually started in the garden. My father's a biologist, and he brought me and my brother up to take an interest in the many lives unfolding around us. So I would go out with this bucket of kitchen waste, banana peels and orange peel, and dump it in the compost heap. And then several months later, I would help him shovel what had now become soil onto the flower beds. And it became clear after a while that this was some very strange miracle, that these things could transform into soil. Who transformed into soil? How does this happen? How could this be taking place without someone making more of a fuss? And so I asked him, and he said it was microbes, it was fungi, it were these creatures that had these powers that were but too small for me to see. And so I thought these must be superpowers. And I really do think they're still superpowers, and we don't think about, I don't think about decomposition enough, even though I try to think about it a lot. But we live and breathe in the space that decomposition leaves behind. This is the space in which we're living now. It's the space left behind by decomposition. So that's really what got me started along thinking about the invisible worlds that really drive so many of the biogeochemical cycles that we live within. And then over time, my interest grew. And when you get interested in fungi, it's kind of like a greasy helter-skelter, like ever-deepening fascination. I know so many fungus nerds who are just sliding helplessly down.
Well, that's good, because I've got lots of questions about lots of specific fungus. And then so from that, how did you then think, right, this is the right time to write this book?
Well, I'd done my PhD in studying mycorrhizal fungi in tropical forests, and And I hadn't actually thought about writing a book, but someone said, do you want to write a book? And I said, well, no, not really. And then someone else said, do you want to write a book? And I said, maybe. And then it kind of happened like that. It's very, very kind of unromantic.
Organically.
Yeah, I just sort of a little bit dragged, kicking and screaming. But once I started writing it, it became all-consuming. You know, it's this thing, and how to talk about fungi, how to talk about this vast kingdom of life. You know, there are so many ways to be a fungus, and there are so many remarkable people studying these organisms, and how to tell this in a story that can appeal to both gardeners and plants people, but also to people who've never read a book about nature or science.
And I think that, well, it's a Times bestseller. So, you know, you've managed to open this world to lots of other people. And I mean, we're already interested in all these things because we're gardeners, but that's, you know, this book has opened it up to so many more. But when I read it in 2020, it was lockdown, and I was reading this book, and it was one of those things of, you know, well, how did I not know all of this before? And there was this whole chapter, chapter 5, on the symbiotic relationship between fungi and plants. And so I was really in there. I mean, we're going to come back to the zombie ants as well, but, you know, that's later. But as gardeners and designers, I mean, how can we leverage that relationship and create more resilient gardens? I mean, are there specific fungi that you would recommend integrating into gardens, I mean, to make those connections?
So these mycorrhizal fungi, the ones that grow in and around plant roots, they supply plants with nutrients and help them withstand stresses like drought and diseases. And the best thing we can do to support these relationships is not destroy them. You know, so much of soil work and the kind of inputs that we put onto soil, even as gardeners, not just as big-time farmers, are damaging to these associations. And so as a gardener, for example, you might think about not adding fungicide. That would be number one, you know, don't kill the fungi with fungicide. But it's amazing how much that happens. And inorganic nutrients like nitrates and phosphates, they disrupt the balance of trade between plants and their fungal partners. So organic amendments wherever you can, thinking about building the soil structure and all this very basic stuff. It's the stuff that humans have been doing for a long time. When you're taking from the soil, to put back into the soil. So this is not just a one-way flow of take. We're not just mining from the soil. We are thinking of this as a two-way street. You might think about leaving dead wood around, letting the garden be a bit messy. You know, dead wood's a site for so much life. Trees are alive when they're growing as a tree, but the real bonanza of the tree's life begins after it's died, and that wood is there rotting and home to innumerable fungal, bacterial, insect species. So, and again, it's all basic stuff, but the thing that's more complex is adding. Do you add mycorrhizal fungi? And this is something that comes up a lot. And it's a bit like, you can think about it a bit like the microbiome in our guts, you know, and you can get these microbiome, these bacterial supplement pills. And a lot of the ones you buy in the shop, these aren't the sort of the A-listers in your gut. They're the ones that happen to be easy to grow in production facilities. And so they may contain X number of billion bacterial species, but you really want those particular ones in your gut? Well, maybe not. You know, not everyone's gut is the same. And so with mycorrhizal amendments, a lot of them, this has been a subject, all the mycorrhizal nerds, you know, they talk about this a lot, and a lot of these amendments don't have, some of them don't have actually any viable mycorrhizal spores or propagules in them. Some of them, that's just a few, now, some of them might do, but they might be completely irrelevant to the place that you're growing, to that soil type, to those plants. You know, it's like right plant, right place, also right mycorrhizal community, right place. And so getting the match is something that's quite difficult to do if you're buying an off-the-shelf product. So generally, I think it's better to create the conditions for a healthy soil and for healthy communities underground and let the right mycorrhizal communities assemble themselves.
I love the idea of that, but what if you're in an urban situation, you know, lots of disturbances happened, you know, you're left with rubble, say, What can we do something? Can we go and get specific mycorrhizal fungi? Or, because I don't know about you guys, but when you go to buy it, it's just mycorrhizal fungi. So how do we know what that is, and what do we do, say, in an urban situation?
Yes, so that's exactly the kind of product that I personally wouldn't use.
Okay, good to know.
Because there are so many different kinds of mycorrhizal fungus. It's a bit like saying, go to the garden centre and get a thing saying seeds. I mean, sure, seeds. We like seeds. We like plants. So it's complex. So, but in that situation, one of the things you'd be thinking about is the soil. Now, you might have rubble, but you're not going to have a garden without soil. So first, you think about building the soil. And I think once you'd started doing that, then you'd have a place for the fungi and the plants to be living and to be maintaining themselves and to keep going over time. That you can add all the fungus you like, but if you keep disrupting them, if you keep, say, in an agricultural situation, if you add fungus and you plow relentlessly and you add loads of fungicide, then you're not providing a home for them to live. So first things first, provide a home for them to live. And then one thing you might do is think, well, given that we don't know so much of who's living in the soil, there's so much we don't know, you might go to a friend who has a very healthy garden and take a teaspoon or a tablespoon of their soil and use that to inoculate some compost to magnify whatever the microbiota in that is, and then apply some of that compost to your soil. That's the kind of way, that's along those lines that I would think.
Yeah, so it's about thinking, giving yourself a little bit of extra time to do these things, not having it immediately. Because that was the next kind of question. So you wouldn't use the mycorrhizal fungi that we can buy. So is there somebody doing the research into particular types of mycorrhizal fungi? So one of the questions I was thinking about was, fungi can often be a pest or, like a disease in some of our gardens, but can we use some kind of fungi to ameliorate that, to make it better to, against pests and diseases?
Yes, so, and just to add quickly, that there are people who are making sophisticated mycorrhizal fungal inoculants that are sensitive to the place and that are relevant, ecologically relevant to this particular situation or that particular situation. It is possible to do that. Just to shout out to that.
But where are they?
But where are they? They're not the ones on the shelf that say mycorrhizal fungus.
I'll get the information. I'll send it out to you afterwards. Yeah.
But yeah, so for fungi can be helpful as essentially biocontrol, but also the way we work with them. There's a wonderful study that came out recently, and there was a fungus called sclerotinia, and it creates a disease called watery soft rot. It's horrible. And this fungus it's a fungus that causes this disease, the soft rot. And researchers found out that if they inoculated this fungus with a virus, a particular virus, then the fungus stopped causing the soft rot, and it became a vital sort of partner of the plant, and it helped defend the plant from other fungal diseases. And all that you needed to do was to give this pathogen a virus, and it transformed the life of this whole consortium. So there's this kind of thinking is, I think, moving forwards, this is, I think, what we can start to imagine as we bring together these more refined tools, but thinking along the lines of modifying these groups of relationships rather than just eliminate the organism causing the problem.
I like the sound of that, but I also know that as humans, we've done a lot of things that may not have, at the beginning they seem quite good, and then years down the line, or not even, you realize that we've made a mistake. So adding a virus to a fungi, how do we know that we're doing the right thing? How do we know that that's not going to end up with, I don't know, like rabbits in Australia or whatever?
That's so I'm not sure, in this particular situation, they would have had to go through, it's not a product you can buy, it's just researchers playing around and finding out what could be possible. So I'm not advocating getting a virus and adding it to these fungi, and those would obviously come with risks. But when you're making a garden or any kind of horticultural situation, that's what you're doing. You're adding plants to an environment, and you could be letting things develop naturally. You could be letting what wants to be there bubble up and just be there. But still, you are intervening. This is an interventional process. And so if we didn't want to do any intervening, then we wouldn't be gardening or planting forests or doing agriculture. So I think part of it is accepting that we're part of this process and working out what kind of dance partner we want to be with the plants that we want to grow.
I mean, and then you were just talking about that sort of native, non-native thing. I mean, it's a big discussion. We talk about it all the time. And again, how do we then find those kind of the fungi that are good for our particular garden? So do we bring extra external things in? I mean, what would you suggest? I mean,
yeah, I mean, I would. A lot of the time when you're bringing a plant into a garden, it's coming already. It's importing its own microbiome. If it's coming from a nursery like the Chatto nursery, then it's probably bringing in a really healthy microbiome, because a lot of care goes into thinking about how these plants are being raised. If it's coming from some other nurseries, it might not have much microbiome at all, because some nurseries are very concerned with drenching plants with fungicides to keep them clean, if you like. So it will depend a lot on where the plant's coming from, but they're not arriving as a blank slate, usually. And if they were arriving as a blank slate, then it'd be a little bit worrying, because it would be like a child brought up in an over-sanitized environment, and the chance of getting autoimmune disorders or allergies, because you haven't had chance to develop a healthy symbiotic discourse with all the creatures that you're going to spend the rest of your life with. So I think we're already bringing things in. Then I would think about the soil and the life of the soil, and you making sure that the soil is alive, looked after, healthy. So I think my general feeling is create the conditions and the life will follow, rather than bringing in specific fungal species.
so it's kind of like a sourdough starter.
Like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
make the right conditions and then it will come.
Yeah, that's basically what I mean.
Okay, so thinking about another one of the chapters, I was asking people what their favorite chapter was. Chapter 4 came up a lot, and that was about bioremediation. And again, it's kind of mind-blowing to think that fungi can clear contaminated land. They've been shown to do that. And again, how would we, so if we were in a situation where we had contaminated land, are there particular fungi that we should look at, or is there any studies that we should have a look at to clear a site?
Depends on what's contaminated with. There are some fungi that could be useful by breaking things down, by decomposing whatever's there. So if you had something like polyaromatic hydrocarbons or crude oil, for example, some fungi can break those down. But if you've got heavy metals, those aren't going to get broken down because they're chemical elements. So then you'd be thinking about something that could sequester those, and then you could take them elsewhere and put those heavy metals somewhere safer. So yeah, it really depends. But it's, again, the whole biomicroremediation thing is, rather than thinking about particular savior species, it's much more helpful, I think, to think in terms of processes, just like one is already doing when one's gardening, or wilding, or any other kind of engagement like this, that there might be successive waves of organisms that come in and pick up where the other one left off. So I would think more in terms of processes. But but it also depends on the site, and it depends on how long you've got, and it depends on what the problem is.
It's never that long. Time is always of the essence. It's always like, get it done yesterday. So that's why it's interesting to see if there was something that you could, if there was a particular type of fungi, but no.
I mean,
Never that easy.
No.
That's the next book you have to write. Which fungi for which things that we need.
Yeah, or like how to make your garden happen today.
Today,
Yeah.
exactly. So thinking about design, and a lot of us design planting plans and put plants together, and often we're thinking about where they come from, or, and how they work together in communities. But I was just thinking about this whole symbiotic relationship between fungi and plants, and would that be a way of connecting plants, like, so looking at the fungi that they work with and then picking a selection of plants that way?
That's an interesting idea. I mean, I think it would be more like, it might be more like, what plants do you see growing together happily? Like, some plants like growing together. There's the classic example of the three sisters in indigenous North American agriculture. And So I would think more along those lines, rather, because we don't really know enough about, different plants can grow with different mycorrhizal communities. Usually plants are growing with more than one mycorrhizal fungus. It's rarely a one plant, one fungus situation. So it's, and plants are promiscuous, fungally wise, and the fungi are promiscuous plant-wise. And so yeah, I would think more about what seems to want to grow together and go that way, rather than try and find the fungus that could connect them both.
I was looking for the easy way out.
There isn't one.
Somewhere. I mean, like, again, thinking about design, so we talked about plants and how we select them, but obviously there's design as well. So how can we, you were talking about wood piles, but what else can we do to encourage beneficial fungi rather than, I mean, I don't know if we have the choices here, but what else can we do in our designs that can make that easier and encourage the right kind of fungi?
So I have some colleagues who are doing a study in Amsterdam, or in a different Dutch city, but they were looking at the green roofs on bus stops, and they have these bus stops with green roofs, and they were looking at the mycorrhizal fungal communities on these green roofs, and they were trying to find out how these mycorrhizal fungi were getting around. They thought of these green roofs as little islands in the city, and how are these different fungal communities moving around the city on these islands, like stepping stones. And they found that the mycorrhizal fungi are very easily dispersed. They disperse themselves well. They get around in the air, and so I think the best attitude is to think of this place as a kind of landing pad for these fungal communities, and make a big receptive landing pad. And as I say, like don't think about the life of the soil. Don't be spraying fungicides. Don't be fertilizing too much. Just let what wants to come, and think about it as a home that is waiting to be populated and enjoyed.
So, I love a good garden visit, and I'm just wondering, with this in mind, are there particular places that you've been to that are really good for fungi? So in Holland, are there particular gardens that we should all go and have a look at, or a selection of spaces that you think are particularly good?
I spend a lot of time going around looking at what's in the soil, but much of what we do is we take samples of the soil and we sequence the DNA and we find out who's living there, because most of these fungi don't produce mushrooms. So the only way you can find out who's living there is to take the DNA and to sequence it. And then you end up with a list of who's there. And then you might find that there's high mycorrhizal diversity in one place, there's low mycorrhizal diversity in another place, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the place with high mycorrhizal diversity is better a fungal community or worse. It just means that that's how it works there. So above ground, you might have boreal forests, and these are forests which aren't that diverse above ground. Just a few species of conifer, basically, but they're very diverse mycorrhizally below ground. And then you go to other forests which are very diverse above ground, and they might be less diverse below ground. And so, yeah, it's hard to make these comparisons. It's more about how does it all seem to be behaving. Is it healthy? Is it regenerating itself? Is it ticking along? Does it feel good? So it's about those relationships more than the.
I'm going to have to just hang out with you, because I think you've just been to Canada and now you're going to the Amazon. So maybe we just need to follow Merlin around to have a look at his mycorrhizal.
Or you'll find me just scraping mud into small tubes.
The answers lie there. Okay, so you're talking about these studies and people are really interested in all this stuff, but how do we access those things, or how do we even find out what's being studied?
That's a really good question. So first of all, it depends how comfortable you are reading like primary scientific literature, and I think this is something that really needs to be addressed. There's so many people who work with plants, who work with soil, and the primary scientific literature is kind of unsatisfying. Often it's like, well, more studies are required, or it was on this very specific system that's not necessarily applicable. So there are more people now who are making more sort of practical digests of this and of the primary literature, and And there are also there's great folks doing this somewhere in the States, these sort of mycorrhizal culture collections. One's called INVAM. There's another place called Rodale Institute. Thinking very much from an applied point of view. You know, what works, and why does it seem to work? And I really like this way of thinking and researching, because it's ultimately what we care about. So yeah, there are resources, and hopefully they become more widely known.
More accessible, because that's the thing, you know, because we all want to know how to use these things. And I mean, I'm quite interested in fungi. I don't know as much as you, obviously, but I went to Kew Gardens, to the fungarium, which was really interesting, but I wasn't able to extract what to do with them. They were just showing us all of the fungi that they had. So that's the tipping point. Like, how do we access the information, and how do we know what's being studied? And I think you actually had this really interesting part of the book, which was about, in Italy, they had wheat, and they said that the bread tasted better from wheat that had certain mycorrhizal fungi, and that the strawberries were tastier and redder and more sweet because they were attached to a different mycorrhizal fungi. And I was like going, how do I find out what these are? Like, where do I find that information out? Because I would really like to have very sweet, you know, red, beautiful strawberries. But at the moment, is there any way that we can access that? Like, I mean, how did you find that all out?
Well, so I talked to the nerd who did the study, and but I agree. I think there's a lot more applied research required. My dad's always hassling me up. He's like, Merlin, I know you're going off to this place to see what the mycorrhizal fungi live in the Mongolian desert, and now you're going to the Amazon. I want to know what's in the garden. Like, can't you tell me that? And I was like, yeah, I get it. Like, and he said, I want to know what's here and what's here, and I want to know what's on the heath, and I want to know the shady bit, this bit, and I completely agree. You know, and it's very hard to find that information. I think what we really need is a kind of, you know, like these 23andMe tests where you can sort of take a spit swab and send it off, or there's ones for called uBiome, where you find out your microbiome by taking a stool sample. Something like that for the soil in your garden, where you can just send off these things and you get back a really beautifully presented, like easy to navigate, little, you know, dynamic graph of your microbiomes in your gardens. I agree that would be really, really helpful. And then
maybe that's the next thing we've got to do.
Yeah.
This is the group that we need to do it with. Yeah. It's kind of like, I think I saw you talking to Tim Spector about that thing, and it's like having I think that would be the dream. And, you know, coming back to what's happening at the moment in the world, so climate change, we're always talking about climate change and resilient, robust plants. I mean, is there a way to kind of encourage those kinds of plants and make them do well because of something that we do with the soil? I mean, is there some particular fungi that we should be looking at, or some kind of practices that we should be doing?
Well, actually, in June, I was in the Gobi Desert in Mongolia, and we were looking at, it's related to this question, we were trying to map the mycorrhizal communities there, because there are lots of plants that live there in very extreme conditions. And so and no one had looked at the mycorrhizal communities and the roots of these plants. So we were there to collect these samples by these plants, because we wanted to find out, first of all, who was there. But the reason why that was of interest is because whoever was there, fungally, was helping these plants survive these extreme conditions. And as more of the world desertifies, it becomes more and more relevant to find out, you know, what these communities are and how they're helping plants. And the reason is that when plants came onto land, when plants began, you know, they were freshwater algae floating around in lakes and rivers. And as they started to move onto land, they found themselves confronted with new sets of challenges, like the challenge of drying out, like the challenge of having to explore the soil to find water and nutrients, which is not what they've been doing before. They've been floating in a kind of nutrient soup. So when they came onto land and started washing up onto these soggy shores, then they struck up a relationship with fungi. And fungi have their network, their chemically ingenious exploratory networks that are good at navigating the labyrinth of the soil. And these fungi could supply these early plants with what they needed, and including defending them from drought, helping them to overcome drought. So they still do. This is what mycorrhizal fungi are. They're the descendants of these relationships. And so in areas like these deserts, you know, these fungi are doing what they've always done and helping plants to survive the extreme conditions of land. And so that's why we're there, to try and find out who was there and what they might be up to.
And so we'll wait for that to come through.
Yep.
With your selection, you can have a Merlin Sheldrake selection of mycorrhizal fungi for different situations. That's what we all need.
The desert blend.
Yeah. I mean, so thinking about, lots of my friends are vegans, and we're always like, people are a bit more mindful about how they, touch the earth and how we're designing and how we're doing things. Is there a way that what ethical considerations should we have when we're kind of looking at these natural fungal communities? How do we balance the use of them and, what they need, and also, what we need to find out? I mean, is there a way that we can do it without doing what we always do and messing it all up?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the reasons why inoculums can be problematic is because you're just adding a bunch of species that are easy to grow, adding a bunch of species that are easy to grow in production facilities into this area in the soil. And you might be introducing species that would become, they might be weedy species that take over and displace the local communities, and we simply don't know. So that's just another reason why it's important to think about these as vibrant ecological systems. They might be below the ground, it might be out of sight. It doesn't mean that they don't sort of behave in similar ways to above ground ecosystems where introduced species can create problems. So fungal conservation, I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and it's a big issue. Fungi have not received a kingdom's worth of attention in most fields of fungal study, and including in fungal conservation. Most conservation frameworks exclude fungi, and when we don't conserve fungi, we undermine our efforts to conserve all the other organisms that depend on fungi. So paying attention to fungal conservation is definitely important. Paying attention to what species you're introducing, if you are introducing any, making sure to be sensitive about that. And then, I mean, there's a whole sort of fungal conservation movement that's building. The Fungi Foundation, who I work with, a great organization working with, is tuning into the whole fungal conservation side of things, and taking an interest is a really good way to begin that journey.
So the Fungal Foundation is
Fungi Foundation.
The Fungi Foundation is a good one to look up. Okay, and I mean, that's kind of like the next question: how do we bring this information out to the wider arenas? How do we make people start thinking about conservation in this context with everything that's happening underground as well? How do we get into those layers of, government or whatever we need to do?
Yeah, so I think finding ways so the soil angle is one way, so soil health is becoming more and more of an issue, thankfully. And fungi play vitally important roles in the soil. Fungi, these networks are creating soil, they're helping hold soil together, they form a sticky living seam without which soil would not be from the aggregates and cohesive structure that it does. Mycorrhizal fungi are receiving billions of tons of carbon from plants every year, and that's pumping it down into the soil, nourishing the soil food webs. So soil health is one way into thinking about fungi in policy and in the hands of decision makers. And then plant health is another, because plants, to be healthy, depend on vibrant fungal communities. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's more about finding where are your avenues. If there's something you care about, where are your avenues of connection to decision makers, and then slide fungi into the avenues that you already have. And there's always a way to do that because fungi touch every aspect of our lives.
And I saw that you did. You were talking to Parliament about fungi, so you're going into those top layers, and you're making those discussions, kind of, making people aware of those things. Yeah, and. So one of I thought was a really interesting part of the book was, as gardeners and garden designers, we're always kind of problem solving. There's lots of problems that we have to solve. There's a dry area, shady area, whatever. And you had a problem, and you were like, well, maybe I'll try the psilocybin and see if I can come up with an answer. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that process? And did you come up with the answer?
So it was actually, it was LSD, and it was a study that there was. I was in the tea room at the university tea room, and there was a sign on the wall on a notice board, and it says, "Do you have a meaningful problem that needs solving?" And I thought, yes, yeah, definitely do. And it's a whole thing. My whole PhD is a writhing mess. Oh God, I can't even begin to list the problems. And they said, if you do, then call this number. So I called the number. I said, hi, I've got loads of meaningful problems that need solving. Can you help? And they said, well, this is a study. We're recruiting people to take LSD in the hospital and see if this psychedelic can help them solve their problems. I was like, great, sign me up. And I went there, and then they were sitting in this hospital room, and you have lots of tests beforehand and questionnaires, and then they gave me the LSD, and I had this experience. And partway through the experience, my assistant, everyone had an assistant, and my assistant they said, Merlin, is it time to start thinking about your work-related problem?
Do I have to?
And I was like, oh gosh, my work-related problem, which one? And so I did, but I had a wonderful time. And what really happened?
But did you answer the problem?
So the answer is it's complicated, of course. So I was trying to think about how we can imagine the trading relationships between a certain kind of plant and their mycorrhizal fungal partners. And I didn't come up with an answer because, and even if I had, you wouldn't believe it, right? Because I'd just be there on a hospital bed, take the LSD, and I was like, I've solved it. And it was not like that. It was more like I started to experience this. I imagined the soil as a vibrant, dynamic place, full of lives, full of creatures improvising their way through life, bumping into these new problems, finding solutions in this very dynamic way. It wasn't like, oh, here's a soil with these creatures living in this bit here, like that. Just like you're talking about problem solving as a gardener, like thinking about these creatures problem solving their lives in this wild, wild place, and all improvising, all making it up as they go along. And that was very helpful perspective, and I really carried that with me. So I didn't solve the problem, but it prepared me to think in more refreshing ways about
Yeah.
this world.
So, should we all do it when we have a problem? that was my next question. How do we? No. Okay, where do we get them? No, we won't go there. Okay, so we're talking about fungi. We're talking about how useful, beneficial, whatever it is. How do we monitor it in our soils and not disrupt what's already there? You know, there's this whole thing about no dig and why it's so good. I mean, how do we actually understand what's in the soil? Is there somewhere that we can find that out?
Yeah, so no easy way right now, unless we start this thing that...
Yes,
no,
today.
don't. Yeah. But I'm working with an organization, and this is actually exactly what we're working on. It's called the Society for the Protection of Underground Networks, or SPUN. And we're trying to make maps of mycorrhizal communities over the whole planet. And the idea is that there are lots of people who know how important these fungi are, but aren't able to factor them into their decision-making because they don't know who's where. It's like, we've got maps of climatic maps, we've got maps of ocean currents, we've got vegetational maps. We have no idea of the global distribution of these below-ground communities. So we're trying to make them, and that involves lots of sampling, involves a wonderful data team making big predictive models. It involves so many different things. So the idea is to produce these maps, and so that the decision makers will be able to say, okay, this is an area of high endemism and high diversity. And so below ground over here. And so this is going to be a special zone. So let's take extra care here and maybe not put the shopping center here, and then hopefully over time that will become more and more refined and more small scale. At the moment we're working in 1 kilometer square pixels, just because it's the whole world. But over time, so this is an active area of research and something we're thinking about a lot.
Yeah, because I think all of us would really love to be able to work out what we have to then, build upon that. Yeah. And I'm glad that it's happening, but timescales, we need to know.
Yeah, but I mean, this is, it's good to know, but also remember all the long history of human horticulture and agriculture where people have had vibrant, healthy systems looking after the lives of the fungi there implicitly, just because of the way that they were attending to the health of the soil and the ecosystem as a whole. So I think there's a lot that one can do now just by being a good steward.
Okay, well, so your work is incredible. The book, changed my life a little bit. So, because I just didn't have an idea of that. But what I loved about kind of reading about your recent stuff is that you're using your fungal kind of knowledge to do other things in life, which is kind of what I'm trying to work out how we do that with gardening. So I'm going to come to your hot sauce. Does everybody know that Sheldrake and Sheldrake have a hot sauce, a fermented hot sauce? And just wondered how that all came about, and what other avenues you've got, and are there other things that you're doing using that knowledge?
Well, the hot sauce is, me and my brother have loved fermenting for ages, and it's something we do together, and fermenting is so wild. I think of it like a jar of fermenting chilies. It's like a little microcosm of life. You have these waves of microbial populations rising and falling in each other's wake, each creating the conditions for the next. And it's just like the big biogeochemical systems that power the biosphere, and that like chemical tides within the biosphere. It's vast, like the carbon cycle, the phosphorus cycle, and but it's all happening in a jar. And you can taste with your own unaided senses. You can taste the chemical transition as it progresses. So for me, it's really a little summary of how life happens. And so we care a lot, and you get delicious sauce, or you get delicious cider, or whatever you've made. So the hot sauce was a way of us just having some fun, really. It's kind of an art project. It's like, let's find a way that we can work together and be silly, and so that's fun, and make sauce that we like eating.
I mean, it's delicious sauce. This is not an ad. But, and how did you use your knowledge to do did you do anything differently? Because lots of people ferment, lots of people make sourdough and whatever else, but did you have a specific way of, using what you've learnt?
Well, we use koji, which is a Japanese mold that makes miso and soy sauce, and we put that into a lacto ferment. And so it wasn't really, there was a kind of, let's add more fungus kind of instinct, but it wasn't like the mycorrhizal work that I've been doing informed in a one-to-one.
Study behind it. There's no like spreadsheet.
No, not yet. But there might we could do that, and that could be fun. But no, it's quite intuitive, really.
Okay. And what other projects that you're working on in the same kind of just different things that are not?
Oh, that are not fungus.
Well, kind of related to fungus, but in a slightly different way.
Well, one of the things is, this is actually very fungus, but
Wow.
sorry. That actually relates to this video that I just wanted to show, because it's with my collaborators in Amsterdam, we're trying to look at fungi as processes. It's very easy to think about as organisms as things, but I think we're processes. We are the matter and energy that make the matter and molecules and cells that make up our body today are different from the matter and molecules that made up our body 3 years ago. So matter is passing through our bodies. And we're all processes. And fungi are processes too, but you don't really think about them as processes until you look inside them, and you can see the flows and wild traffic moving around inside these networks. So we've got this imaging robot that allows us to look at lots of mycorrhizal fungal cultures in one batch. And I just wanted to show a video of some of these flows, just so you get a sense, when we're talking about mycorrhizal fungi, of what's really happening. And of course, this is in a lab, in a plate, in a dish, so it's going to be far more interesting outside in the soil. But this is, let me try. Hold on. No.
Yeah, it's up.
There we go. Hold on. Not that one. Not that one.
Perhaps the most...
Sorry. Not that one.
Holiday videos. What I did in Canada.
Fungus. Here it is. So I'm going to press play, and then you'll see it moving, and it's in real time. So this is not sped up. Look at what happens at the junctions, and look at the way that there's flow in different speeds, moving in different directions. It's not at all uniform. Look at the change of direction there, different speed there. So this is one tiny junction in a big network. And these fungi are circulating nutrients and carbon around the soil. And let's try, is there another one? Oh, let me try. Oh, this one, yeah. but this really helps get a sense of, when we say mycorrhizal fungus, they are problem-solving, actively trading networked organisms that are doing something like this all the time. And it's a little bit like what I was saying earlier about thinking of them as living creatures engaged in the process of living, actively engaged in problem solving and relationship forming. And so that's a very exciting project that I'm always excited to spend time on.
And, for the layperson, how does this all happen? Is there a brain? Is there, part of the whole book is like, do we need to have fungi in our kind of format? Does it need to be a brain? I mean, how do they do all these things? How do they problem solve? I think there was that example about the blocks of wood, which are the same sizes as the populations in different parts of the country, and then the fungi made the network for motorways. I mean, how does that happen?
This is really what we're trying to ask. And there's no good explanation for it. They have no center of operation. We have brains and we have hearts, when we're centralized organisms. But these fungal networks have no center, they have no head, they have no heart. They're constantly remodeling themselves. It's like the network is like the atlas, the road atlas, and then the flows are like the traffic on those roads. But the road atlas is constantly changing, and the traffic is constantly changing. And one of these fungi might be sprawled over tens of meters, connecting the roots of 5 or 6 different plants, conducting trading relationships with millions of different root tips, in quite different, high nitrogen patch over here, high phosphorus patch over here. How is it adjusting its behavior to deal with this? And that's exactly what we're trying to ask, and we're baffled as anyone else. And we go into the lab and we look at these videos of what's going on, and like kids, like in this darkened room, and like, play it again. Oh no, that's so hard to explain. It's like really, it's a thrilling adventure, and it's I think one of the big questions of our times. These fungi are regulating so much of the biosphere of the living world, and we don't understand how they do what they do. I don't know why everyone isn't, shaking the bars of our ignorance to.
No, but we are. That's why we're here.
We are.
We're waiting for the answers, and it feels like there's a lot more questions every time you think of something. There's just more and more questions. I mean, I'm really hoping that you get to the end of that, because I need some answers too.
Well, I'm trying as hard as I can with a group of wonderful people who are trying as hard as they can as well.
Great. I mean, one of the stories that I don't know how many of you have read the book, but the zombie ant. It's just, I think there's there's a TV program which was kind of based upon that. I don't know. Anyway, but the fungi goes into an ant and it becomes zombified and it does certain things. And this fungi is, made to do that particular thing. It gave me nightmares for quite a long time, and I couldn't sleep. I mean, is that the most nightmarish thing a fungi can do, or is there more?
It's pretty nightmarish. I do agree. I mean, what's amazing is that these fungi, they grow into the ant, or any other insect. There's lots of insects that have fungi that do this to them. But it's able to puppet their behavior with exquisite precision. Infected ants, ants normally stay low to these carpenter ants stay low to the forest floor. It's a safer place to be. Their instinct keeps them there. But the fungus gives them a fascination with heights, so they climb up a stalk, and then the fungus the fungus compels them to bite onto the underside of a leaf. But infected ants align themselves with the direction of the sun and bite around noon. So it's the timing, the alignment, the exact height from the forest floor, and it's a way of the fungi borrowing an animal body. They don't have twitchy, muscular animal bodies that can walk or bite or fly. So why bother evolving one where you can just hop into this one and get behind the controls? And it's astonishing because, that level of precision. The fungi are producing cocktails of chemicals which are dynamically, which are in real time altering the ant's behavior. And I think it's amazing as an example of what fungi can do. It's also nightmarish.
I mean, and actually when I went to Kew, if anybody goes there, they have a tarantula and they've got some ants, and it does stay with you, I've just got to say. It's not good. So as a room of gardeners, I mean, what are the things that we should take from your studies? I mean, you're a gardener, I think, as well. Yeah. Well, your dad is. We know that. What is he taking from your studies? What's he using in his garden? How is he setting his garden up? What are the takeaways that we should have?
I mean, I'm just doing really simple things like composting and dressing the soil, not leaving the soil exposed, mulching fruit trees, and not using any inorganic fertilizers, not using any fungicides, as I keep saying, and thinking about soil compaction. I'm not doing, try not to compact the soil, try not to disturb the soil too much. If I can avoid digging, I'll avoid digging. These are all, again, such basic. I'm sure everyone here knows these, we've known them forever, but these are leaving piles of dead wood, in a hedge, like there's all this dead wood, leave it there and let it rot and enjoy that. And then not just think about the soil, but think about what's going on above the ground too. So think in terms of having a diversity of plants, having plants that are doing different things at different times of year. So there's always carbon being flushed into the ground. These are the kinds of things that I think about, and it's all very simple. And it's about just what I like to do is to imagine being in the soil. It's like, well, what kind of home is that right now? And what am I doing to make that a more exciting home for the creatures there?
Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of I've got some questions from other people as well, but there's a few more that I've got. I went to a show called the Floriade last year, I think it was in Holland, and they had a whole building, furniture, everything was made out of fungi. I mean, what's the future? I mean, how can we, instead of using plastics, could we use fungi? I mean, what can we do? What are the kind of parameters for that? I mean, how far can we go? So
far, we're really just, the fungal sciences have been around for a while, and humans and fungi go back a very long way, and indigenous societies have all sorts of very profound and exciting relationships with fungi that are being remembered and have long been remembered. But there are all these new frontiers like that, what you say, like microfabrication it's called. So when you get mycelial networks to grow around, say, corn stalks, and you can get them to grow into different shapes. You can make bricks or surfboards or lampshades, or you can get them to make a kind of leather-like material. And the exciting thing about these is that you can get these fungi to do this in a matter of weeks, usually on agricultural waste. So you're harnessing a waste stream, you're diverting it into the waiting fungal appetite. The fungi create the material, can do it inside very quickly, and then you have something which can be used, but also will decompose at the end of its life. So there's a huge amount of potential here, and it's attracting more and more interest, and it could really be helpful in disrupting really problematic industries like plastic and oil. And
plastic, yeah. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if we could use one of those bioremediation fungi to take away the contaminated waste and then make some fungi leather?
Well, there's a great example of some folks doing this in Namibia, where there's an invasive thorn bush, which is a huge problem. So then they found a way to get the thorn bush, mulch it up, grow oyster mushrooms on it. It produces food. And when you've picked the oyster mushrooms, then you use the sort of the block of substrate that grew the oyster mushrooms as a brick to make a shelter, a house. So you're turning thorn bushes, first of all, you're getting rid of the thorn bush, you're turning it into food, then you're turning it into shelter, and everyone's participating in this process and empowered to do this. So that's a really good example of the kind of, if we think more like a fungus, there's no such thing as waste. And so I think that's the kind of thinking that will help us adapt to some of the problems we've created.
Think more like a fungus. That's what we need. We need it on a badge. I mean, what an amazing thing that would be to be able to have those sort of closed systems where we're using all the mistakes that we've made, which we've made for you, and then being able to make something really useful out of it, which was then, building houses. So I got a couple of questions from people who sent them in to me. So a few people were asking about the best materials to use in the garden. So somebody was saying that they use wood chip on pathways. Is there anything else that they should use? I know we said about log piles and stuff. Is there anything that's new or any other interesting materials that are coming to the forefront that you think we could
Well, wood chips, great. I have a friend, an amazing fungus nerd friend in Finland, and he uses kind of log, sort of the short log palisades at the edges of his beds, which he's inoculated with edible fungi. So they're providing a refugium for lots of decomposing fungi. They're also producing edible fungi, and then he's also inoculating his wood chip paths with things like wine cap mushrooms. So everything from the bed to the palisade to the path is fruiting at different times. So I think so wood is great, like wood chips is great, and there's loads of it around. Like I call up my local tree surgeon, and he's like, yeah, please, I'll come. When do you want me to come? I'll give it to you.
Take it away from me, take it off my hands. No, and I love that again, that all of these different things are happening just through the design of a garden, and you're inoculating stuff as well. Incredible. I think this question is maybe a bit of tongue-in-cheek, but somebody said, is there any chance that we could add magic mushrooms to politicians' food and water to make them feel more human?
I think that's a great question. I don't know the consequences. It's quite unpredictable when people take psychedelics. There's a temptation to think that they make everyone into better people, and maybe sometimes they do. But also, there are lots of cultures who use magic mushrooms, like the Aztecs, for example, and they had a great fondness for human sacrifice. So I don't know whether actually
swings and roundabouts.
Yeah. So
we don't want to put ideas into their heads.
Yeah.
I was wondering if anybody in the room had any questions. John, I don't know if we have a. Shall I come up? Oh dear. Hold on. Do you want to just tell me your question then?
Yeah. I've got loads of questions, but the one I wanted to just check with you, Mary, some of our most disrupted places, like chalk pits, gravel pits, brownfield sites, are some of our best places for wildlife and biodiversity. And I'm assuming, because they're disrupted and they're so much, that the mycorrhizal would be a lot less in those places. So can you explain why the balance of those two things?
We're going to repeat the question. That'll be right. Because can you guys hear at the back? No. No idea.
Thank you. So I was just interested that some of our most disrupted places, some of our places that are mined, brownfield, post-industrial, often are some of our best places for wildlife. And I'm assuming from what you've just said that they're probably places where the mycorrhiza is relatively low. And I wondered whether you think that biodiversity in all its forms, including fungus, doesn't seem to match in those places. Presumably the fungus is less there?
Well, it depends. First thing I would do is look at the plants. Like, how do the plants that are growing there seem to be happy growing there? And you might have ruderal, weedy species, like early successional species that move in after this disruption. You also have early successional fungal species that move in after disruption. Like when a glacier retreats, revealing bare rock, fungi allow plants early successional plants to move in there, and there's a whole certain kind of ecosystem that exists and likes to be in those places. So I would say you probably would have early successional fungal species matching the early successional plants that are happening there. It's also very possible in some of these contaminated sites, mycorrhizal fungi can really help plants deal with, say, heavy metal stress. So it's also possible that there are fungi are really working overtime in those places to make life livable for those plants if there's been contamination.
So that's quite an optimistic thing then, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it's a biodiverse gravel pit, then something's going right. Yeah.
There was a question on the screen which is now gone.
Oh, do you want me to live stream question? Yeah. So, if dealing with honey fungus, which is quite thuggish, what would you recommend to maintain some balance in the soil?
That's such a hard one.
That's a big one for the gardeners.
Yeah. So I've spoken to lots of honey fungus nerds about this, and honey fungus exists, and it tends to kill trees that are weaker. So looking after the health of the trees. So the one you might think about reducing compaction. I've been spending time with arborists on Hampstead Heath, and they have a huge problem with compaction, which has been really making the trees suffer. And in 3 years, in some of these trees, they put log palisades around some of these trees. And in 3 years, he's found like whole flushes of ectomycorrhizal mushrooms around the base of these trees, just from having 3 years less compaction. So that's just stopping doing something that's that's harming the tree. So thinking about the tree health, so you might then think about compost teas, that if, looking after the health of the tree so the tree can not be so vulnerable to the honey fungus. Also, you find honey fungus, you might think the honey fungus is on the tree, but like a lot of the time you can have detached roots of a tree that have broken, say, when the tree's been swaying in the wind, and there might be a big dead root that the honey fungus is living on, and it might not be on the actual root of the tree itself, the living root of the tree. So, but once it's there, I mean, that's, as far as I know, the best way to go. You can't start rooting it out. If you apply fungicides, you're really shooting yourself in the foot. So about maintaining the health.
You have to live with it.
I mean, it's not going away.
Yeah.
It's not going anywhere.
And there's one more question that says, what does Merlin think about pre-mixed mycorrhizal scents? I don't even know what that is.
Scents?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Do you know anything about pre-mixed mycorrhizal scents?
I don't know what the scents. No.
Whoever wrote the question, send us some in. We'll have a smell and tell you.
Yeah, sounds great.
Running.
Hello. Is it working? Yeah. I've got a question about drought and mycorrhizal health, because we've had a few really dry years, and I've kind of noticed that the soil where I garden has not really recovered after those 2 years of drought, even though we've had a wet season. It's not been too bad this year. And I wondered, does the mycorrhizal fungus really struggle when you get a lot of drought? Can it kill the whole system, or will you find that there's new strains come in and colonise that are more kind of hardy when faced with dry weather?
Yeah, so they'll definitely know if fungi need moisture to do their thing, and if it's totally dry, they're not going to be very active. But they can tend to, that's why they produce spores. Spores are like little capsules of themselves that can withstand tough conditions and then sprout again when the going gets good. And they're used to it. Like if there are lots of parts of the world that are frozen for half the year, like totally solid ground, and the fungi there, again, they sort of retreat into a kind of suspended state, and then they return in the spring when the ground thaws. And so I would say that they would probably be able to bounce back from that, given time and given moisture, because they're used to it.
Always time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Merlin. That was very inspirational. Less of a question, more of a shout out for the waxcap species. I think very relevant for garden designers is to mind the grassland species as well. In my experience, they can be so incredibly beautiful that actually doing special taking into waxcap species in your maintenance and fertilizing less, and also trying to disturb less, that they can actually be such a nice feature in your garden. A good parrot waxcap or even a ballerina waxcap can be so beautiful. What are your thoughts about that in relation to the garden design?
I think that's such an important point, and that's the way that. Exactly that. The sort of let's think about who wants to live here and how do we create the conditions for them to do their thing, and let the fungi be a feature. And waxcaps are so special, and we can actually help to not destroy the conditions they need to grow. Yeah.
In your opinion, would it be worth, if you create a new or recreate a new lawn, to leave like one corner intact in order for the fungus to be able to re-establish itself on the long run?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to go, to think about it like a little refugium. And from that place, then the fungi can grow. And that's like the area itself is an inoculum source that can then propagate and spread. I think that's exactly the kind of thinking that we should be pursuing.
Thank you.
Okay, we do. Yeah, I was going to say there's a big sign that says time is up. So we've got one more question. Perfect.
Hello. Hi, Merlin. Thank you. So I used to work in mycorrhizal research as well on low-till agriculture. And I'm interested to know, so now I work in making meadows in urban places, turning amenity grassland into meadows. And you talked about the damage that cultivating the soil can do for the soil microbiome. The most commonly used way of killing the grass to create a meadow is to use herbicide, and often it's glyphosate. But I was interested to hear your opinion on whether it's better to use a herbicide like that, or if it is better to cultivate the grass, or an alternative approach that you might suggest. But what would you do? What would you say is the best way to achieve it, considering as well cost implications?
That's a good question. Glyphosate does disrupt mycorrhizal fungi, and there's been a few studies on that recently. And so the cost benefit would be, if you disrupt you're disrupting the plants, you're disrupting the fungi, but how quickly could they bounce back? And maybe you want to create the conditions for a different set of fungal communities to arise there. Another option would be to, it's a hard one. Yeah, another option would be to plow, but I don't know if that would do what you want it to do. I guess another option would just be to reseed and to let it happen over time more slowly. It's tricky, but glyphosate is definitely going to cause disruption to those fungal communities.
Good question. We were discussing it earlier. Okay, I'm sorry. I know that there's loads of other people who want to ask questions. I'm sorry, but you're going to have to find him when he's having a cup of tea. But
so that you all know, we're going to be welcoming back Merlin and Humaira later on this afternoon at 2:30. So if you have got questions that are burning questions, jot them down and put them on the live chat, and Humaira will make sure she brings them up.
I'll bring them up. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah.